The silent promise. The stage lights were warm, yet Sundar Pichai felt a quiet chill deep inside. As he looked out at the thousands of faces waiting to hear him speak, his mind was not on the speech, not even on the technology he was about to unveil. Instead, his thoughts wandered back to the one person who had stood by him when the world gave him nothing but doubts. Her name was Anjali, and without her this moment might never have existed. The audience only saw a successful man, a leader, a visionary. But behind the polished suit and calm smile was a journey filled with struggle, sacrifice, and an unspoken promise that had once threatened to break him. The story no one knew was about to slip from his lips, and what he would reveal would shake hearts far more than any product launch. Years before that stage, Sundar was just a young boy in Chennai. His family lived modestly, in a small home where every coin counted and every decision mattered. He remembered nights when the electricity would go out, leaving the house in darkness, but those nights often felt brighter than the days, because his father would light a small lantern and tell him stories about resilience, about believing in something greater than the circumstances around you. His father worked tirelessly. His mother stretched every rupee, and Sundar grew up learning that humility was not weakness. It was strength in its purest form. But even as he excelled in school, there was a quiet fear inside him. Could a boy from such beginnings ever dream of standing on the world stage? At college, he met Anjali. She was sharp, kind, and carried a warmth that made even the hardest days lighter. Their friendship grew into something deeper, a connection built on trust and shared dreams. Sundar spoke often about technology, about how he wanted to do something meaningful, something that could change lives. Anjali listened, encouraged, and challenged him when he doubted himself. But as their bond grew stronger, so did the pressures around them. Sundar wanted to study abroad, to take a leap that could open doors, but such a path demanded money they did not have, and courage that sometimes seemed out of reach. His heart longed to chase the dream, but another part of him feared leaving her behind. And yet, in that conflict, Anjali made a choice that would change everything. One evening, under the fading light of campus, she looked at him and said words that burned into his soul forever. She told him she believed in him more than in anything else. She told him that if chasing his dream meant crossing oceans, she would wait, no matter how long it took, no matter what she had to give up. It was not a simple declaration of love. It was a sacrifice, a surrender of her own comforts, her own future, because she saw something in him that he sometimes could not see in himself. Sundar wanted to protest, to tell her it was unfair, but her eyes carried a calm strength that silenced him. She was not just supporting him, she was carrying half his dream on her shoulders. But dreams, no matter how beautiful, rarely come without storms. When Sundar arrived in America, he was greeted not by opportunity but by loneliness, cultural shock, and the weight of expectations. The streets were cold, the dorm room even colder, and the distance from home felt unbearable. He often walked back from class with heavy steps, wondering if he had made a mistake, wondering if the cost of his dream was too high. Phone calls with Anjali were rare and expensive, yet every word they shared gave him the fuel to push forward. He worked hard, studied harder, but still, doubt gnawed at him each night. Could he ever turn this struggle into something worthy of the faith she had placed in him? Then came a day when everything nearly shattered. Sundar had applied for an internship that promised to cover part of his expenses. He had prepared for weeks, pouring himself into the application, praying for a chance. But the rejection letter came swiftly, almost mercilessly. He sat alone in the small room, holding that letter in his trembling hands, his chest tight with despair. He thought of his parents who had sacrificed so much. He thought of Anjali waiting patiently in India, and he thought of the silent promise he had made, to make all their sacrifices mean something. But at that moment he felt like nothing but a failure. The tears came slowly, quietly, until the pages of his notes blurred before his eyes. Yet fate often moves in ways no one expects. That same night, as he sat broken, his phone rang. It was Anjali. Her voice was calm, steady, filled with the same strength she had carried back on campus. She told him that setbacks were not signs of weakness but tests of endurance. She reminded him of the boy who had studied under lantern light, the boy who had never allowed circumstance to dictate his spirit. She told him that she had not left her world behind just for him to give up at the first wall. Her words reached deeper than any letter of rejection ever could. In her voice he found not just comfort but a fire that reignited his will to keep going. And so, Sundar wiped his tears, put away the rejection, and whispered a silent promise to himself and to her. No matter how many walls stood in his way, he would climb them all, but neither of them knew then that the greatest test of their bond was yet to come. a test that would force Sundar to choose between the love of his life and the dream he was chasing across the ocean. The audience leaned closer as Sundar paused on stage, his voice tightening with emotion. He was about to reveal the moment when everything nearly fell apart. The decision that could have changed not only his life, but also hers forever. And just as he opened his mouth to speak, the lights dimmed slightly and the hall grew silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The distance between hearts, the months rolled by like waves that refused to rest. And Sundar often found himself caught between the thrill of learning and the crushing loneliness of separation. Every day began with lectures, long hours in the library and nights staring at textbooks that seemed heavier than his own spirit. Yet in those quiet hours his mind wandered to India, to Anjali, who was walking her own silent road of sacrifice. While he struggled with assignments and unfamiliar culture, she was holding her family together, bearing the weight of questions from relatives and whispers from friends who wondered why she had chosen to wait for a man half a world away. The unspoken judgment cut deep, but she carried it with a calm grace, never letting her pain touch him, because she knew his burden was already heavy enough. Sundar often replayed her voice in his memory, the way she would speak with gentle certainty, telling him he was meant for more. Yet, even those comforting echoes sometimes felt fragile when matched against the harsh realities around him. His classmates seemed more confident, more prepared, and Sundar, with his thick accent and modest clothes, felt like an outsider. There were moments when he sat in the corner of the cafeteria, listening to others talk about vacations and luxuries he could not even imagine. And in those moments, doubt whispered louder than any voice of reason. He began to question not only his place in this new world, but also whether the sacrifices of his loved ones would ever be justified. One evening, after a particularly long day, Sundar received a letter from his father. The handwriting was slightly shaky, but the words carried the familiar weight of wisdom. His father reminded him that greatness was not about comfort but about perseverance. He wrote that even the brightest flame begins as a small spark in the darkness, and that Sundar was that spark for the family. Tears welled in Sundar's eyes as he read, but they were not just tears of pressure. They were tears of renewed purpose. And yet, as he folded the letter carefully and placed it beside his desk, another thought clawed at him. What if the weight of expectation was too heavy for one man to bear? Anjali, too, faced her own silent battles. While her friends celebrated new milestones, engagements, careers, travels, she chose a different path, waiting faithfully for a future that remained uncertain. There were nights when she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had asked too much of herself, if love alone was enough to sustain her. Still, each morning she rose with quiet determination, sending him small notes of encouragement, reminding him that distance could not erase the bond they shared. Her resilience became his anchor, but behind her words of strength there was a longing, a loneliness she kept hidden from him. Then came an unexpected turn that neither of them had foreseen. During one semester, Sundar was offered a chance to present his work at a small conference. It was a golden opportunity, something that could open doors to connections and possibilities far greater than he had imagined. He worked tirelessly, pouring every ounce of energy into preparing for it. But when the day arrived, something went terribly wrong. Standing before the panel, his voice quivered. His nerves betrayed him, and his accent drew quiet smirks from some in the audience. The presentation ended with polite applause, but Sundar walked away with his spirit shattered. He felt humiliated, as though all his effort had crumbled in a single moment, and for the first time, he considered leaving it all behind and returning home. That night he dialed Anjali with trembling hands, his voice breaking as he confessed his failure. He told her he was not sure he belonged in this world, that maybe he had been foolish to think he could climb so high. There was a long silence on the other end, and Sundar braced himself for the disappointment he feared most. But when she finally spoke, her voice was steady, filled with a strength he could not understand. She told him that failure was not the opposite of success, it was the path to it. She reminded him that his journey was not meant to be perfect, but to be persistent, and that even if the world doubted him, her belief in him would never falter. Her words cut through the fog of despair, but something inside him still wrestled with doubt. Sundar promised her he would try again, that he would not give up. But as he hung up the phone, he whispered to himself that promises were easier to make than to keep. Little did he know that this very struggle would soon lead to an unexpected door opening, a door that would force him to make a decision not only about his career, but also about his love for Anjali. The night grew darker, and the phone lay silent on the desk, yet Sundar could not sleep. His heart pounded with the weight of choices, and in that restless silence, he realized that the next step he took would shape not just his future, but hers as well. The breaking point. The seasons changed. But for Sundar, the weight of uncertainty remained heavy. He woke each morning with a tightness in his chest, a quiet voice inside that asked whether he truly belonged in a world so far from home. Classes grew harder, competition sharper, and while others seemed to move with ease, Sundar often felt as though he was stumbling through fog. He carried his failures silently, hiding them from his family and even from Anjali, fearing that his honesty might burden the people who had already given up so much for him. Instead, he told them only half the story, leaving out the nights when he sat at his desk staring at books until dawn, fighting back tears of exhaustion. Anjali, meanwhile, was fighting her own invisible battles. Her friends were moving forward with their lives while she remained tethered to a promise made under the dim light of a campus evening. She never regretted her choice, but sometimes she longed for his presence, for the simplicity of walking side by side without oceans between them. When relatives questioned her, when whispers grew louder, she defended him with quiet dignity, but each defense cost her a piece of herself, and when she finally sat alone in her room, she wondered how long a heart could endure such waiting. Still, she held on because she believed that love was not measured by distance but by the strength to wait when it mattered most. One evening, as Sundar walked across campus, he overheard two students talking. Their words were casual, but they cut like knives. One of them joked about how some students from poorer countries never really made it, how they were destined to remain unnoticed in the crowd. Sundar froze in place, their laughter echoing in his ears long after they walked away. It was not just an insult, it was a reflection of his deepest fear. That night he could not bring himself to call Anjali. He stared at her number on the screen, his fingers hovering, but instead of dialing, he closed his phone and buried it beneath his pillow. Shame held his voice hostage, and silence stretched between them. Days turned into weeks, and the silence grew heavier. Anjali felt it like a shadow creeping between their hearts. She tried to reach him with letters, with small reminders of love, but his replies became shorter, his voice less steady, as though something inside him was slipping away. Her heart began to ache with the fear that distance was not only physical but also emotional. She prayed each night that the boy she believed in had not been lost to despair. Then came a moment that would force Sundar to face himself. A professor who had quietly observed his work called him after class and spoke words he did not expect. The professor told him that while his presentation had faltered, his ideas were extraordinary. He urged Sundar to try again, to believe in the strength of his vision rather than the judgment of others. Sundar walked out of that office with a flicker of hope. But hope alone was fragile. He knew he needed something stronger. He needed to rebuild not only his confidence but also the trust he feared he was losing with Anjali. Guilt finally pushed him to call her. When she answered, her voice was gentle but distant, like someone standing at the edge of a storm. He confessed his silence, his fears, and his shame. For a moment she said nothing, and the pause felt like eternity. Then she spoke, her tone steady yet tinged with pain. She told him that love was not about being perfect but about being honest, and that hiding his struggles had hurt her more than the struggles themselves. Her words pierced him deeper than rejection ever had. He realized then that resilience was not just about enduring failures. It was about sharing the burden with those who chose to walk beside you. Their conversation ended with a fragile promise to rebuild, but as Sundar placed the phone down, his heart raced with a new fear. The opportunity the professor had hinted at required him to make a choice that could reshape everything. A research project that demanded long hours, relentless dedication, and complete focus. Accepting it would bring him closer to his dream, but it would also mean less time for Anjali, less presence in the bond already strained by distance. If he refused, he risked falling behind forever. Sundar sat in the quiet of his small room, torn between two paths. The future seemed to stretch before him like a narrow bridge suspended over a deep chasm. Whichever step he took, something precious would be at risk. And in that silence, a single question echoed louder than all others. How much could love endure before it began to break? The sacrifice. The offer for the research project lingered in Sundar's mind like a haunting melody, beautiful yet unsettling. Every part of him knew it was the kind of chance that could shape his future, the kind of work that might open doors he had only dreamed about. But with it came a price measured not in money but in moments stolen away from the woman who had given him everything. He spent nights staring at the ceiling, torn between ambition and love, between the dream he carried since childhood and the bond that had carried him this far. He feared that whichever choice he made, a part of him would be lost forever. Anjali could sense the distance growing again, though Sundar tried to hide it behind reassurances. She noticed the pauses in his voice, the moments when he seemed far away even as he spoke to her. Deep down, she already knew what was happening. She knew the project was not just another task, it was a turning point. And so she made a decision that revealed the depth of her love. Instead of asking him to choose, she encouraged him to take it. Her words were steady, but her heart trembled as she said them. She told him that his dream was bigger than both of them, and that she would rather endure the loneliness than watch him abandon his path. He wanted to argue, to tell her he could not sacrifice her for success, but her voice carried a strength that silenced his protest. The days that followed tested them both in ways they had never known. Sundar threw himself into the project with relentless energy. The hours blurred into nights and the nights bled into mornings. There were times he fell asleep at his desk, only to wake with pages of notes beneath his head. He pushed through fatigue with the memory of her voice urging him on, but even as he advanced, he felt the growing ache of her absence, a quiet emptiness that no achievement could fill. Anjali, too, carried her share of the burden. Each day without him grew heavier, and though she smiled for her family inside, she battled a loneliness that seemed endless. Letters and phone calls helped, but they could never replace the presence of his hand in hers, the comfort of his laughter in the air. Still, she held on because she believed that love was not about being together every moment. It was about standing strong even when the distance stretched like an ocean. Yet there were nights when she cried silently into her pillow, whispering his name into the dark, hoping he could somehow hear her across the miles. The project soon began to attract attention. Sundar's ideas, once doubted, now drew admiration. Professors praised his persistence. Peers began to see him differently, and for the first time he felt a glimpse of what it meant to belong. But with every step forward, he carried the weight of guilt. He knew that his progress was built on the quiet sacrifices of the woman waiting for him, the woman who had left everything for his dream. And though he was grateful, the fear never left him. What if she grew tired of waiting? What if one day he returned to find her gone? Then, just as he began to believe he could balance both worlds, a letter arrived that shook him to his core. It was from Anjali. Her words were gentle, but they carried a pain he had never seen before. She wrote that she still believed in him, but the silence between them had grown unbearable. She confessed that sometimes she wondered if love alone was enough, if waiting without end could break even the strongest heart. She ended the letter not with anger, but with a question that pierced him deeper than anything else. When will this dream finally let us be together? Sundar sat frozen, the letter trembling in his hands, his heart pounding as though it might break through his chest. For the first time he realized that the very dream he was chasing to build a future with her was the same dream threatening to tear them apart. And as the weight of that truth settled over him, he knew he had to make a choice that would define everything: to push further into the dream and risk losing her, or to return before success arrived and risk losing the dream itself. The impossible choices underread Anjali's letter over and over, as though each word carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. The paper shook in his hands, not because of the chill in the room, but because he knew he could not ignore the question she had left behind. When would the dream let them be together? It was a question that gnawed at his soul because he had no answer. The world celebrated ambition, but no one spoke of the quiet sacrifices buried beneath it. He sat alone by the window, watching the night sky stretch endlessly above, and wondered if the stars too felt the burden of shining while hidden in the darkness. The next day he walked through campus with heavy steps. The project that once filled him with excitement now felt like a chain around his heart. Professors praised his work. Peers nodded in admiration, yet none of it eased the ache inside. He had achieved recognition, but recognition could not hold his hand, nor could it soothe the loneliness he felt when he thought of her waiting. Each moment of success seemed to push her further away, and he began to fear that his dream might come at the cost of the only person who had truly believed in him from the beginning. Anjali, on the other side of the ocean, was wrestling with her own doubts. She still loved him deeply, but love without presence began to feel like a shadow. Her days were filled with routines that looked ordinary on the surface, but beneath them lay a quiet sorrow. Every time the phone rang and it wasn't him, her heart sank a little more. Every time she saw couples walking hand in hand, she felt the sting of absence. She wanted to be strong, but even the strongest heart can grow weary when it waits too long. Just as Sundar considered abandoning the project to return to her, something unexpected happened. His professor called him into the office and revealed that the work he had been doing had caught the attention of a well-known company. They wanted to interview him for a position that could change his life forever. It was the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime, a doorway into a world he had only dreamed of entering. Sundar sat there stunned, torn between exhilaration and dread. He knew what this meant. If he accepted, he would have to commit even more time, even more energy, and the distance between him and Anjali would grow wider still. He walked out of the office with the offer heavy in his mind. His heart longed to share the news with Anjali, but fear held him back. How could he tell her that just as she asked for togetherness, life was pulling him further away? That night, he finally gathered the courage to call. When she answered, her voice carried both warmth and exhaustion. He hesitated, then told her about the offer. There was silence on the line, and for a moment he wished the call would drop so he would not have to hear her response. But when she finally spoke, her words were nothing like what he expected. She told him to take it. She told him that his dream mattered, even if it meant she had to keep waiting. Her voice was calm, but he could hear the crack beneath it, like glass trying not to shatter. The call ended, but Sundar could not sleep. He lay awake, haunted by the thought that maybe she was giving him permission not out of strength but out of fear. Fear of being the one to hold him back. He realized then that love was not just about sacrifice but also about presence, and he feared he was asking her for too much of one and too little of the other. The next morning, as he prepared for the interview, he made a silent promise to himself. No matter what happened, he would not let the dream steal away the woman who had given everything for him. But fate, with its cruel timing, had another plan. Just hours before his interview, he received a message from India, one that left his heart racing and his hands trembling. It was not from Anjali. It was from a mutual friend, and it carried news that threatened to shatter everything. The revelation, the message arrived like a storm without warning. Sundar stared at the screen, his chest tightening as he read the words again and again, hoping he had misunderstood. The friend's note was brief, but its weight was unbearable. Anjali had fallen ill. The details were scarce, only that she had been hiding her struggles for weeks, refusing to let anyone worry, refusing even to tell Sundar because she did not want to distract him from his path. He felt the air leave his lungs, and for a moment, the room around him blurred. The interview that once seemed monumental now felt meaningless compared to the thought of her lying weak, far away, carrying pain in silence just as she had carried his dreams. He sat frozen, torn between the opportunity before him and the love that had sustained him. The interview could change his life. But what was life without the one who had sacrificed everything for him? The minutes ticked by, each second louder than the last, and Sundar felt the weight of choice press harder than ever. He closed his eyes, remembering the night she had defended him, the letters filled with encouragement, the patience she had shown when others doubted. Her strength had built his path, and now she was the one in need of his. With trembling hands, he picked up the phone and dialed her number. When she answered, her voice was soft, weaker than he had ever heard, yet it carried the same quiet strength that had always steadied him. She tried to reassure him, telling him it was nothing serious, but he could hear the truth in her silence. He wanted to break down, to curse the distance that kept him from rushing to her side. But instead he spoke gently. He told her that nothing mattered more than her, that no dream could ever be complete without her beside him. She tried to protest, urging him not to give up his chance, but he interrupted, his voice firm in a way she had never heard before. He said the dream was never his alone. It was theirs, and he would rather stand by her side with nothing than stand on a stage with everything and no one to share it with. The decision was made. Sundar skipped the interview. He packed his bags, and within days he was back in India, standing by her side. Seeing her pale but smiling, his heart broke and healed all at once. She had carried his dream when he was too weak to hold it, and now it was his turn to carry her. In those quiet days as she recovered, they rediscovered the simplicity of being together, walking slowly through familiar streets, sharing meals, laughing softly at memories. He realized then that success was not measured by titles or applause, but by the people who stood with you when the world fell silent. But fate, in its mysterious way, did not close the door on him for turning away. Months later, while still in India, Sundar received another letter. The company that had wanted to interview him had heard of his decision, and instead of closing the opportunity, they admired it. They wrote that a man who valued loyalty, kindness, and resilience was exactly the kind of leader the world needed. They offered him another chance, not in spite of his sacrifice, but because of it. Sundar held the letter in disbelief, his eyes welling with tears as Anjali read it beside him, her hand resting in his. Years later, standing on the stage with the world watching, Sundar finally shared this story. He told the audience that behind every achievement there is often a hidden sacrifice, that humility and kindness are worth more than any title, and that the strength to endure comes not from ambition alone, but from the people who believe in you when you cannot believe in yourself. The crowd listened in silence, their eyes glistening as he revealed the truth of how his wife had given up everything for his dream, and how her strength had built the foundation of his life. And as the lights dimmed and the applause filled the hall, Sundar felt no pride, only gratitude, for he knew that true success was not standing on that stage. It was standing there with her watching, her eyes filled with the same unwavering faith that had carried them both through the storm. The story of Sundar and Anjali was not just about ambition, but about the quiet power of love, resilience, and humility. And in the end, what he revealed on stage was not the triumph of one man, but the triumph of two hearts that never gave up on each other.